Welcome to the Ultimate Sync Sessions, hosted by Amelia McCloskey and powered by Ultimate Sync Access, the ultimate platform for exploring opportunities in film, TV, gaming, and advertising. Join us as we dive into the sync world with the key players who shape the industry. Hey everyone, welcome to the Ultimate Sync Sessions. We are joined by Dave Chase from Listener. Hey Dave, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me on.
No problem. So Dave is a music supervisor for luxury brands. So I am super excited to delve into all things luxury, which I love, and find out how the big brands and fashion brands love to use music and how they use music within their brands and fashion shows and things like that. So before we delve into the nitty gritty of all the supervision side of things, let's start right at the beginning. Before the luxury clients and the global campaigns, what first pulled you towards music? Was there like a moment, person, piece of music that made you think, this is it? This is what I want to do with my life?
Yeah, there was always music in my house. Like my parents weren't musicians or musical particularly, but they always had an interest in it. The radio was always on. We were always singing along to things. And for my older brother, he kind of suddenly got into like late 80s soft rock, hair metal, kind of hairspray rock kind of music, Motley Crue, all that kind of thing. And he got really passionate about it. And me and my twin brother, we kind of were really intrigued by it. We'd been all about football until that point. And then suddenly there was all this kind of widdly guitar stuff going on and screaming and or just, I don't know, it was just interesting. He was so passionate about it. And we were hearing all the music come from his bedroom and we were kind of seeing things through him. And it kind of very naturally then became interesting to us as well. And it was more kind of, for me, bands like Nine Inch Nails that he suddenly was getting into that started to strike me, and Faith No More and stuff which had a bit, maybe it felt to me like a bit more personality than a lot of the guitar-y stuff that he was into. But because my brother was a guitarist, when he sold his first kind of Stratocaster copy, me and my brother teamed up together and we bought it from him for like £40, £20 each. A lot of money.
That's so funny.
And he was buying himself a heavy metal version of the Fender Stratocaster, so he could play even faster. And we were just kind of, that kind of got me started. I started messing around on the guitar. Soon after that, guitar lessons. I'd sung in choirs kind of on Sunday mornings, begrudgingly prior to that. So I had a bit of musicality without wanting it. And I just kind of picked it up and got quite good at it quite quickly. And then kind of learned about songwriting. And then I was in bands, so I was learning about getting gigs and I was learning to write press releases and I was learning to annoy everybody who probably didn't even want to listen, to try and push my band forward. And ultimately, I failed.
What kind of style of music was your band? Like what?
Yeah, I started with rock music because it's one of the easiest to kind of pick up at the beginning. And I was kind of tuned into that scene. But then it kind of just evolved through kind of the whole Britpop kind of world. And then it got a bit more kind of experimental, probably too experimental because, you know, I was selling out. So trying to be a bit more kind of like artistic with it, but probably not talented enough to be that artistic with it. I remember sending in a demo to Suede when Bernard Butler quit the band, and I thought maybe I had a chance of replacing him. There was an ad in the back of, I think, the NME or something, or maybe Melody Maker, and they never even got back to me. And I heard my other copy of the demo quite recently, and I'm not surprised that they didn't choose me. It was completely wrong. It was like totally inappropriate what I'd sent. It was just nothing like what Bernard Butler had been playing and what Suede did. But I was sure they were going to pick me.
Yeah, I did a similar route, to be honest. I started off in the same way. part of rite of passage, right? Being in the
Yeah.
industry, you've got to at least be in a band at least
Yeah.
once. The more it sucked, the better. 100%.
But it's also fun because people I've come across within my career who I've been in touch with when I was trying to make it as in the band, who had turned me down. It was quite fun to talk to them about their different approaches to turning me down.
Yeah. Do you know, I heard a story once by someone that used to work in one of the big labels way back when, and he used to say, you know what they do with some of the demos, the bad ones, they play them on the speakers, like, so everyone could hear them. And I'm like, that's awful. I'm like, I hope it wasn't one of mine. So mean. I'm sure they don't do that now, and I won't name which one it was. I'll probably be sued. So from there, what then actually led you into, did you have any other like music jobs before supervision?
Yeah, so I basically, while still trying, I've moved to London and I was trying to kind of get the gigs, and I was playing to like 8 people at the Dublin Castle.
The toilet circuit.
Yeah, and really failing at that, 8 people, including my dad who'd driven our equipment there. And it was kind of like,
I did the same.
Isn't fun. And while doing that, I saw an ad in the back of Melody Maker for like an office junior for a management company. And it turns out, I called them up and they were like, we've already got enough people coming in. And I was kind of like, well, I've done this, I've written press releases, I do this, blah, blah, blah. And I wouldn't stop talking. And eventually they said, okay, come in, you can be number 31. And it got down to 2 of us. And we did a few days work each, free. And they played, it turns out it was the management for NXS. And they were recording their final album at the time, and they played me some demos. The manager played me some demos and asked me my opinion. And I remember saying, there's too many saxophones in this, lose the saxophones. It's not cool anymore. That was cool like 5 years ago. You're going to lose the audience, not gain a new one. And the guy was laughing first, and then he was like, okay, I think that's probably best that you don't come back tomorrow. I was like, oh, what have I done? I've ruined my chance. But his assistant basically recommended me to a company called Dayton Rowe, who were like a 5-person little agency who consulted brands around entertainment, with music as the kind of predominant part of that. And they were working with Coca-Cola, Sony Electronics, and quite big brands. And they were run by a guy called Adam Dayton, who had set up a sponsorship division for a company called KLP, who were quite successful at that time. And yeah, I was introduced to him and his team, and they kind of seemed to like my my obsessive opinions on music. So whenever they asked me about anything, I had a very strong opinion. Like Manic Street Preachers, I was like, Dad Rock. And they were like, what? They're the coolest band out there. And I was like, Dad Rock. And you
always rely on us Brits to tell it as it is.
Yeah. And like they ended up sending me to a bunch of gigs, and I used to have to they pay me 50 quid. I go to a gig, I'd review the gig and just like a 1-pager, send it to them. And then I'd come into the office for a catch up to talk about music. And then they had a magazine that they used to write for one of their clients in kind of the Middle East and Africa kind of regions. And I'd write about new music for them coming through from there. Then suddenly they wanted me in like 1 day a week. And I was still at university at the time, and going in 1 day a week and kind of helping them with kind of thinking about talent for things. And I was booking talent for an event at Legoland, which we called Pop into Legoland. And it was things like Aaron Carter and Bewitched before they got to #1 and all sorts of stuff. And then suddenly it was 3 days a week, and I was booking like Mark Lamar to host a music quiz for a Coca-Cola thing. And suddenly I was booking Steve Coogan to do a thing for Sony Electronics. And I was getting more involved in their wider entertainment business, but they were always leaning into me for my music kind of interest. I wouldn't call it knowledge, because I was quite limited in what I knew about, but I was passionate about it, and I was open-minded, and I was always listening to new stuff and kind of getting excited by it. So that was kind of my starting point. Traveling the world as well while doing it. Luckily, I was, it was
That's
really kind
cool.
of fun stuff, like bringing Paul Young to play in Dubai, or bringing Status Quo to play in a field in Germany for the British Army, which was a really strange one, where I spent 6 weeks living on a NATO army base while helping
Wow.
organize it. I was also helping with some sponsorship stuff and got like BP to sponsor it, which kind of made sense because they were a supplier to the army, and it just kind of all worked together. And dining at the officer's mess, had to dress in a suit of like 21 years old, wearing this like ill-fitting suit with really wonky, spiky hair and big sideburns, and kind of everybody else going, how much would it cost to book Shania Twain? What about steps? How much do steps cost? I like the blonde one. And it's kind of going, let's not have this
Like the
conversation.
blonde one.
Yeah. So,
Your mates must
strange
have thought you were the
experience.
coolest person ever to,
You know what? I
have
don't think
access
so.
to.
I don't think so because, status quo.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Nice people, though.
Maybe your parents then.
Yeah.
What then led from there, career-wise?
It was quite a long kind of journey. I kind of did a bit of job hopping. So one of my colleagues, Kathy Craven, who was the younger sister of a singer called Beverly Craven, who'd been quite successful in the 90s.
Yeah, I've heard of. Yeah.
We just got on really well. And one day she turned to me and said, my twin sister, Claire, works for an agency called Cake. They have a music department where they work with XFM, V Festival, Virgin Megastores. It's PR, but I've told her she needs to meet you because they need someone to come in with a bit of energy to shake up that department. And I was like, okay, that sounds cool. Are you sure I can go? She was like, I'll cover for you. Go and meet my sister. I was like, great. And once I met her sister, the company was quite impressive. They were fairly new, but they were like a real upstart kind of company. They were kind of real energy, full of people who didn't have the experience, the corporate experience, but had kind of quite unusual experiences, often from music within there. They had the guy who had turned Reading Festival from being all about Bonnie Tyler and Meatloaf into being Nirvana and Nick Cave and Butthole Surfers and more interesting kind of stuff. So there were really interesting people in there. And I remember then meeting the CEO who was like, you should probably be an A&R. Why would you want to do PR? I was like, I don't know. There's no A&R opportunities for me at the moment, but there's a PR opportunity here. And he said, yeah, but you've never done it. And I was like, well, surely I'd just kind of find the story, find the journalist who I think is going to write about that story, call them up, talk to them about it, and maybe they'll write about it. And he went, well, yeah. I said, well, I'll do that. He was like, maybe I'm not sure I should be employing you, but come in. So I was there for 3 years doing XFM's PR. It was a time when Zane Lowe was doing the Drive Time show. I kind of clicked with a few of the DJs and ended up as a sidekick on Dermot O'Leary's Saturday morning show kind of every other week. He'd send me into Leicester Square with my mobile phone. People had to find me as part of a competition to win tickets to like Foo Fighters kind of underplay gigs and stuff at the Scala and stuff like that. And then I'd be on air kind of just talking to him about different bands and music experiences and stuff like that. And then I ended up on Tim Lovejoy's Drive Time show. Kind of, first of all, the plan was that I would set up a thing where they would get listeners to review gigs. So they got me to do the first few just to show what it's about and get people to apply. And then they didn't like any of the applications. So they were like, can you just be our live reporter? So I carried on doing that for like 18 months, every like Tuesday and Wednesday night. So those days I'd be doing the PR in the daytime. So at 8 o'clock, I get to Leicester Square to the XFM studio, sit in on the breakfast show for 2 hours with the DJ, Christian O'Connell, listening and talking between songs about how to generate kind of news around the station and about his profile. Then I'd go to Burger King and have my breakfast. And then I'd go into the office and do all the other PR
Very
stuff for
healthy.
XFM and everything else. Then I'd go to McDonald's, get my dinner. Then I'd be standing outside a venue with my phone ready to review last night's gig and preview tonight's gig, go into the gig, go to the after show, stay kind of way later than I really ought to, and then the next morning be back at 8 o'clock in the morning again at the breakfast show. It was kind of insane in terms of lack of sleep, but it was a lot of fun.
That sounds fun though, yeah.
It meant that when I was doing the PR, I was there with all the NME journalists, kind of shoulder to shoulder with them. So instead of being just the PR guy, I was the XFM guy who also did PR. And it meant that when I called them up, they'd more likely listen and then write about whatever it was I needed. So it was fun. I hated calling journalists. It was the one thing I hated. I've always hated sales. But luckily it was a thing, you know, XFM was something that I was passionate about, and they were doing interesting things at the time, and they were really interesting people. And then V Festival was good fun to experience and kind of manage the media on site and have like 1,000 people coming through on our guest list that would be kind of under my kind of day-to-day kind of management and stuff. It was interesting. I learned a lot. And then from there, I was working with a magazine publisher who were doing a magazine for us at XFM called X-Ray. And they just turned it from being a customer magazine into a proper kind of newsstand magazine. And they called me up one day and were like, can you come and see us? And I had a really good chat with the owners of it. They owned a magazine called Sleaze Nation, a style magazine, and a dance music magazine called Jockey Slut. And they always worked with brands like Diesel and Puma and Jose Cuervo. And they were getting advertising money, but they felt they had the right to do more with these brands. So we sat down, had an afternoon session in a bar where we were just thrashing out what they could do. And we decided to set up our own agency. So I left Cake. I was like 27 years old. We set it up. We utilized the knowledge and the mindset of all of the teams within the magazine business. So music journalists, art directors, all sorts of creators, and like the commercial advertising team to help us get in front of the brands. And I was we built it up to, I think, as a team of 10, working closely with the founders and working with, Diesel, Puma, all these great brands. We helped Banksy with his, one of his early kind of exhibitions because there was an affiliation through a sister company. And we did loads of fun stuff. And then suddenly I got called into a meeting where they were like, okay, we're making your role redundant. And I was like, what? We're doing quite well. We were actually breaking even, and kind of we were going to improve on that the following year. I'd been there a year at that point, and they were like, we've decided to focus on the magazines for a bit. I was like, okay. And then a month later, the magazines went under, and the founders let me know that the truth of it was that they were about to lose their magazine business. They needed to cut costs, and they were going to run that business themselves now, and they didn't need me to do that, but they were grateful for what I'd done. So I appreciated what they did, but it was a complete reset. And I kind of thought, okay, I don't have to go down this agency leadership thing now. Maybe there's a different route. So I just kind of went and met everybody, and I was turning jobs down, and I was overly confident in terms of what I could deliver, because I've been very lucky in that experience to that point, in terms of how to approach things and what not to do as well. So when people were coming to me saying, we want you to come in, you can be our business development director and work 3 days a week. I was like, why would I work 3 days a week when you're going to need me 5 days, 7 days? It's not going to work for me. No, thank you. And also it wasn't necessarily a job I wanted. And then I helped put on a music festival on Clapham Common, a sister event from Lovebox, the Groove Armada event. And we had like 13 weeks to turn it round. It was the Prodigy manager, John Fairs, doing the production, a guy called Adrian Lee, who was the promoter, who was kind of leading it. And I was overseeing the marketing and then general support to kind of help make it kind of work. We nearly got Flaming Lips to headline, but they couldn't commit by our absolute final kind of advertising deadlines. So we ended up with Moloko, which was great. And we had Ninja Tune do a stage. We had Fatboy Slim and Skint, their label, doing a stage. And we more than broke even, and it was really good. And the money behind it was the money behind Coco. So we were talking,
nice.
And they were talking about, okay, we're going to be employing a head of music. And I was like, you need to employ this guy, David Phillips, who used to work at Cake, who prior to that was the Reading Festival guy. And they were like, oh yeah, we're actually talking to him. I was like, he's your man. He's the man. You need him. And then when he went in, he called me up and was like, now I'm in. Do you want to come in and do the marketing? And I was like, yeah, why not? Launch a music venue. So we went in, they launched unsuccessfully, and I'd been there for a Club NME night on a Wednesday night where like 150 people were in there on a 2,000 capacity for a club. It was really not working. So they closed down and they were doing a reset, which was the right thing to do. And me and David teamed up and we launched it. There were some brilliant people around us as well. Mark Smith, the VIP guy who just got under the skin of the Camden scene and was making sure Amy Winehouse was there every week. The Libertines were there, and the Strokes, if they were in town, they were invited. We were, our place was full of the right people. And suddenly we were inviting all the bar staff from all the bars. So when they closed, they'd come to our clubs, bringing people from the bars with them. They'd have free drinks tokens at the beginning, which meant that suddenly it was just busy and there were queues around the block. So we successfully launched the venue. I then kind of essentially worked myself out of a job. They didn't need me at that point because it was feeding itself. But at the same time, I got approached by one of the V Festival promoters who run the marketing department for their music promoter called Metropolis Music. So anything from Robbie Williams stadium tours down to kind of new artists, next big thing kind of gigs. I handled the marketing for it. And then after a year there, I didn't really want that job, but it was useful because I got to know all the booking agents and I got to know even more about kind of the touring system and how everything kind of worked and how profit was made in that business and everything else as well. And also how to market it better than I had at Coco, because that was such a small version of it. And then Mute Records were looking for someone to join the marketing team, and I'd never worked at a label. So I applied, and it was one of the first jobs I'd applied to since the start of my career. And I got the interview, and Daniel Miller, the founder, was sitting in it, and the marketing director at the time, Howard Corner. And it just kind of felt good. And they liked that I had a different perspective and wasn't coming just from another label. I was coming with a broader expertise with the live music thing, but also the brand thing, and just engaging with audiences in different ways. So I ended up taking the job and spent 18 months there. The head of marketing, Howard, left about 2 months in, and there was a recruitment freeze, which did me the greatest favor because it meant I was then running the department, working closely with the managing director, who was a former marketing director himself. And we launched Goldfrapp albums, Nick Cave albums, Depeche Mode albums, some really unsuccessful smaller bands, a band called Tiny Masters of Today, who were a 13-year-old and his 11-year-old sister. But they had Kimya Dawson and Karen O and all sorts of other people playing on their record because their dad was quite connected on the Brooklyn scene. And Bowie had written about them on his blog, and there was just this thing going on. And we released an album which sold 161 copies, which lost a lot of money. But Mute, being the artist-friendly label that it is, Daniel signed them for a second album straight away because he really believed in them. And it was so amazing to be within an organization like that where we needed to be commercially successful because we were owned at the time by EMI, but we had a leader who was also artistically driven. So he believed in the long term. The short term, it was a mistake. It was an error. He didn't want that to happen, but he was also, he believed in that band and wanted to commit to further support. So I learned a lot from Daniel in that time. But because EMI was being sold at the time, I was also looking at an exit for myself before the redundancies that were anticipated that later did come. I needed to be ahead of that. And I ended up taking a job at a joint venture between Universal Music and WPP. And the intent was that we were representing Universal artists within the WPP ecosystem. And I would be essentially like a white label head of music within WPP agencies. I started at Mindshare, got that going, then moved across kind of the Mindshare's kind of sister companies. We had a head of sync there, Rosari O'Sullivan, who is amazing. She was brilliant. And I was following everything that she was doing and learning about sync while I was doing more kind of partnership kind of activity. And then trying to bring in the sync opportunities at the same time as trying to build partnerships for huge brands like Pepsi and Ford and Google and lots of others. And I wouldn't call it the most successful WPP business, but it made their agencies look cooler. And we did a bunch of fun stuff along the way. Universal dropped out of the partnership about halfway through, but WPP were committed to it because it really worked from their perspective. Universal didn't like that I was presenting opportunities to like Unilever or whatever, but if Unilever didn't want a Universal artist and they wanted Britney Spears or somebody who was signed to Sony, I had to give them what they were asking for. So I had to have an independent thing, and Universal didn't like it. So we ended up in this situation where it was just WPP. We did a whole bunch of stuff, and I learned so much from it. While I was there, I was desperately trying to leave. I was looking for other jobs because it was just a little bit too corporate, but it was I was still learning every day. Then I did a deal for American Express to sponsor the Somerset House Summer Series gigs. And then I met the activation agency, Momentum. We worked well together during that process. And then I was asked by Amex to join Momentum if I would consider that to run a partnership with Live Nation across 10 territories. So I ended up joining Momentum, realized on day one it wasn't the job that I wanted, but I stuck with it for a few months and helped them tidy up their partnership, got it going in a few markets where it hadn't really established itself. And while I was there, I got a call saying that would I have a speculative chat to give some advice to Christopher Bailey at Burberry? And I was kind of like, Burberry? Don't know much about them. And I'd never really thought much about fashion either. So kind of quick Google, okay, they're doing interesting things. They'd already started a few kind of music things. They'd always had music soundtracking their shows, and musicians were loosely involved in what they did. I could see there was scope to broaden that. So I kind of thought, yeah, I'll have a chat with this Christopher Bailey guy. You never know what can come from it. I've always been open to meeting people. So I thought, why not? And in the meantime, I then left the Momentum job. And a week later, went in and met Christopher. We clicked straight away. We got straight down to him explaining what he was trying to do. And I kind of very quickly was kind of like, these are some of the ways you could attack that. He sent me off to a fashion show that he happened to have taking place 2 weeks later. I turned up in an H&M jacket because I didn't have any luxury clothes. Bought a belt on the way because I thought I should have trousers that stay up. We'll better polish my shoes. I don't know if I'm meant to wear smart shoes, but I will. And then kind of got there. Couldn't work out how everyone just like zoomed in really quickly at the beginning. While it was happening, I was Shazamming the music just to make sure I knew exactly what was playing because I didn't want to get it wrong if I bumped into Christopher or one of the team. And then suddenly it finished like 10 minutes later and everybody dispersed. And I was like, what am I meant now? Yeah. And I was like, okay, so I'll go home. I went home and then sent a message to Christopher saying, loved the show, loved what you did with the music there. I loved that there was brand new music. There was a band called Kill It Kid that they used on the finale, but they'd had some, like, there was U2 in there, which surprised me. And I asked the question because Irish band for a very British brand who have focused on their Britishness. I know Ireland is just kind of next door, but I was just wanting to understand what it was. And he just got back saying, come in next week. So I came in next week and he was like, there's a job. It's our head of music. This is what I think it is. Will that work? I was like, I think so, but could we adjust those bits? And Sarah Manley, the chief marketing officer, was there as well. And she was like, absolutely, this will be totally fine. Then she sent me down to the HR team, and I was sitting with the HR teams, and they were like, "So, tell us about this job. This is the first we've heard about it." And I was like, "Okay, so this is it." And I had to work out the details there and then, and it was all fine. And they called me up a couple of days later saying, "Okay, here's our formal offer." I was like, "Yes, I'll take it." And then I started later that month. And yeah, that was October 2011 it was Halloween in 2011. That was my first day.
Wow. So, first of all, what a journey. I mean, even up to there, that's not even to where you are now, but how blessed you've been throughout the music industry that's notoriously tough anyway, but to be able to like have the kind of roles that you have.
None of them paid me very well. That's something I should be clear on. To that point, I hadn't been
the
paid very well.
realities.
Yeah. It's like with the experience, kind of like
the experience is second to none,
invaluable.
Right? Which has landed you where you are now, really.
Yeah.
So it's preparing you for what you're doing now. But what amazing experiences, though.
The funny thing is, as well, remember, I'd never done any music supervision to this point either.
Yeah, that's the point. So now let's delve into, the Burberry side of things. And so what were the main things that obviously you rightly noted, it being a British brand, and the need to use, British type acts. What other things did you bring, like stamp your identity, your ideas that you brought into it, especially at the beginning?
So the key thing for me was that they were a fashion brand who created a great opportunity for musicians through numerous places within their business, all the different touch points from the store music to Burberry Acoustic, which had already launched. And I'll go into that a bit more later, to their fashion shows, of which Christopher had been doing that for 10 years and choosing music for fashion shows for those 10 years. And prior to that, he'd seen Tom Ford do it at Gucci and, in his other roles, other kind of creative leaders. So he had all that experience in doing it. And he knew and he understood that I was coming into this with a need for his input and his team's input to guide me on the stitching together from the fashion point of view. But what he was buying into from me was the music perspective, but also my experience of having worked with brands in numerous different ways, and my passion for music. And I've always had a passion for new music right from day one. And that's what drove me through my first job, that passion, and always kind of learning. My whole XFM era while I was at Cake, where I was kind of like really soaking everything up in that XFM kind of scene and kind of just knowing everything about the bands that were breaking through. And that just stuck with me through the other jobs as I went. I knew when I was in Mute, I was working closely with the A&R team and gaining insight from them about all the kind of music they were looking for and hearing demos and all sorts of stuff to kind of really tune into that earliest possible version of new music. So not just the new music that's being presented by a label, but what are they even looking at? So when I was talking to Christopher, I was like, well, you've launched Burberry Acoustic, you've got a great platform. I was kind of like, it seems like it's a fashionista musician crowd that are being kind of partnering with you at the moment. Where, who's booking it? And they were like, it's our VIP team who are great. But of course, it's going to be the son of Brian Ferry, who's also going to be invited to sit on the front row at a show. And it was a fashionista kind of crowd because that was where the information was coming from. So I was kind of like, I'm going to come at it from a very different perspective through my broad connections through the industry. And then I'm going to dig deeper. I'm going to make sure that, I was friends with so many A&R people. I was like, I'm going to dig into that wider knowledge. I'm going to talk to all the people, kind of junior people in the world of sync, as well as the more senior. The ones who are on the ground going to gigs every night and seeing everything are as important to me as the presidents of these labels and everything else as well. And I just got into it. So I made sure the funnel of talent coming into the business was stronger and more musical, and kind of like maybe had a chance to break through. That wasn't like integral. They didn't have to succeed like in their own terms, but if they could and we could play a role in helping lift them, that felt important. You know, Christopher was very clear to me that he wasn't trying to be the music industry, but he loved the idea of empowering young emerging talent in a way that he'd been able to empower kind of models and art directors and stylists and everybody else. He just felt he hadn't quite nailed it with music, and maybe this was now the opportunity of doing that, because he was so passionate about music and music was fueling his work, and he obsesses about musicians and music when he's working, and it can really inform his work and kind of help him kind of lead him in a new direction that he may not have thought about otherwise. And it was from pure passion as a music fan. And I was able to fuel that fandom, but also his creativity as a result of that. So for me, it was about tuning into his taste very quickly, which I was able to do. We were kind of like-minded, but also it was kind of, I'm younger than him, but not too much younger. So I was kind of aware of much stuff that he'd grown up with, because I've been hearing it on the radio or whatever. And so I had a kind of sense of his world and his vision of the world of music and what he'd grown through. I'd seen everything he'd worked through. One of my first meetings with him after joining, he talked me through his iTunes collection from A to Z. And it was a brilliant meeting, because he talked passionately about, this is what I love about this artist. Oh, I've always wondered about this with that artist, or I've done this with this artist, or I tried to do this, but it didn't happen. And I don't know why, or because of this. Or Ryan Ferry's my next door neighbor, and I feel uncomfortable working with him unless it was something really meaningful, really kind of like insightful stuff for me that helped inform the decisions I made on his behalf with the broader business. I think what he liked about me coming in was that he'd had a bunch of music people put in front of him who were all pure marketing people who had worked in marketing roles only. But I was coming at it with that marketing instinct and knowledge and expertise, but also a broader perspective on it. And I think because I've always been quite open-minded in how I approach things, and I've always believed that anything is possible. I think he bought into that, because he comes up with fun ideas which feel impossible, and needs the people around him to be able to take it, not be scared by it, and be able to run with the rest of the team to make that magic happen. You know, make the impossible possible, and walk away not believing what you quite achieve, but knowing that's your new benchmark for the work moving forward. So whatever you do, it's always has to improve and improve and improve and be better. And that's kind of what drove us all forward, because that's what drove Christopher forward, and we really believed in him. So I guess, going back to the question, because I do, as you'll notice, like to go off point a little bit.
That's okay.
I kind of think I was bringing an open-mindedness, an ability to bring a real kind of quality kind of funnel of new music into his vision, and kind of utilize my live music experience with understanding that world and knowing who to call to make something happen, knowing the kind of right side of things from having been label side, understanding how an artist might be thinking at certain points in their process as well. And then being able to translate, while I learned the fashion, I was translating the music business and musician world into a fashion world while learning the fashion industry from him and his amazing team, and therefore able to translate the world back out on his behalf.
You're listening to the Ultimate Sync Sessions with your host, Amelia McCloskey, where the world of sync meets opportunity. Stick around for more insider insights and stories straight from the heart of the industry.
What great experience, though, like to work with such a visionary like that. by the sounds of it, and I always feel so motivated and inspired around such vision leaders like that. Let's delve into one of the projects, an artist that you did bring in that you're most proud of, most excited about, that just works so well.
There were so many. I was so lucky to get to work with so many. There was, if I think about the one that made the biggest difference to actually shift how we worked with music was Tom Odell. So I've been at Burberry maybe 3-4 months, and already in that time we'd shot a few Burberry acoustics and brought in artists like Ray Morris. We had launched a Shot an Eyewear campaign built around music videos, and I've worked with Marika Hackman, who at that point she was playing to like 10 to 12 people at gigs in Dalston, and she'd gone to school with Cara Delevingne. So she actually came by the VIP department. Actually, she gone to school with Cara Delevingne, who'd sent a demo of Marika's to the VIP team, who shared it with me, and I was like, she's really good and really different. And I called Marika in.
That doesn't always happen either.
Yeah, exactly. And I called her in, and we kind of teamed up. I helped her, and she brought her into her first recording session. And then I brought Ray Morris into a recording session for a music for a fashion show. So we were starting to do all these things with real quality talent. And then suddenly we had this event coming up in Taiwan where we wanted a musician to sing and probably play piano, maybe guitar, but probably piano we were thinking like, 8-string players or something like that was Christopher's kind of loose brief. But it has to be someone new and interesting. And I was like, it can't be anyone we've worked with before. So I just went digging, and I came across Tom Odell, and he hadn't released anything to this point. Most of the stuff that he'd released in his kind of pre-signing to Columbia kind of era had disappeared from the internet. It'd been removed because they wanted it clean, I guess, when he was going to launch. He was writing and had started to record his album at that point. And there was this demo video that they'd been using to help showcase who he was for the music industry itself, to sell into the Spotifys and Apples and everyone of this world. And someone played it to me who probably wasn't meant to, but he did a brilliant thing, because I just was kind of like, can you send it to me? Because I really want to watch that again. And when you're ready, then we'll work with Tom. He's like, yeah, cool. He sent it to me. I played it to Christopher, who was like, who is this guy? And it was like really raw, this vocal and piano performance, kind of really imperfect, but in the most beautiful way, with a touch of like Mike Scott from the Waterboys, and real just interesting tone. And I did some digging and found Tom's manager, Sam Eldridge at URock, and was like, sent him a message and was like, Sam, I'd love to talk to you about Tom Odell. And he came back to me going like, how do you know about Tom? How do you know I'm managing him? I was like, that's what I'm here for. And we had a chat, and he went, look, we're 6 months too early, but in 6 months' time, we're going to want Burberry to work with us. You would be our perfect partner. So if I say no now, there's a risk that it won't align further down the line. I was like, no, I said, not necessarily. If it's not going to work, it's not going to work. But all we want to do is fly him to Taiwan, have him perform with this 8-piece orchestra, 3 songs within a broader Burberry brand event with all sorts of crazy digital kind of experiences, and music is the kind of central thing. But Tom's performance will be an integral part of it. And I was like, we'll film it, but we won't use the music. It'll just be the first glimpse of Tom in that market. They'll hear his name more, and in the markets around it. And he was like, yeah, okay, done, sold. And Tom did it. So I flew out with Tom. We rehearsed for a couple of days with musicians. He performed. It was brilliant. Christopher enjoyed it. And then me and his manager, Sam, stayed in touch. And once we were getting towards our next fashion show, so that was in April 2012, and then September show was coming up, So in kind of late July, I got in touch with Sam speculatively without talking to Christopher, and was just kind of like, is any of Tom's music ready yet? I'm just pulling ideas together for Christopher at the moment for the next show. And he was like, well, no, we're working on things, but in a few weeks, we might have a demo for you. I was like, okay, cool. Whenever you're ready, do. But just have in mind that I really want to play something to Christopher ideally before 2 weeks before the show happens, just to give enough time to make it all make sense. And if we do, we might want to rework the rest of the music to fit whatever we choose of Tom's. And I was like, and I particularly like Another Love. It's such a good song. He was like, well, that will be the first single. Like, great. So it's like, he was like, it's definitely our priority of what we're working on. Okay, good. So a few weeks later, okay, I've got a nearly finished version of it that you can play to Christopher. Okay, great. Played it to Christopher, who was like, we have to open the show with this. And went back to them, okay, we're on. We want to open the show with it. Let's get moving. We had a licensing team who worked with us. The marketing procurement team used to run that side of it for me at that stage in the early part of my time there. And we had a brilliant music procurement agency, Resilient Music, Richard Kirsten, and at the time, Stacey Haber, who were looking after that side of it to give me the space to focus purely on the creative side of it, but also have an oversight of their world and help join dots wherever needed to my relationships. And so they got on with that bit while I was trying to make sure that the version was ready and finished. And we ended up using a nearly final version of the mix. So the first time that song was ever played, broadcast publicly, was at a Burberry show. And they were able to use that then, his team, in selling to media. So this show, it's just soundtrack to Burberry London Fashion Week show, which led to like Edith Bowman talking about that and mentioning Burberry on Radio 1 when she was playing the track. Then off the back of it, the BBC got more supportive as well. It really helped. It kind of fueled it. He ended up on Later. Christopher watched Later, sent me a text saying, he's so good. Do you think he'd play live within one of our shows? And we'd never had any live music in a fashion show at that point. And this was like, midnight on a Friday, texting Christopher back saying, I think he'd probably be interested. So then over the weekend, I was in touch with his manager and, he was checking in with Tom to make sure that Tom would feel comfortable with it. But they were like, yeah, that timing works. And our next show was going to be around the time of the Brit Awards, where they were hoping he might be in the mix with like the Critics' Choice kind of award. And there was a lot going to happen quite quickly in that phase. So they were like, yeah, he's going to be really busy, but we can do it. How do you see it working? We were like, okay, so we're going to use songs first, and then we'll have a wall at the back, which has always been in our shows, which will open up, and there'll be Tom performing, perhaps with an orchestra, following on from what he'd done for us in Taiwan. And he went, okay, I'll talk to Tom. Tom came back via his manager saying, orchestras are just too obvious. What about singers, like real gospel singers? And me and Christopher loved the idea of that. So we were like, yeah, totally, we'll do that. Christopher then, I spoke to Tom, then Christopher spoke to Tom, and kind of we both separately briefed him. And then I kind of took it on and spent a few days with Tom in the lead up to the show. So the show was on a Monday lunchtime. I sat down with him on the Thursday afternoon and we were auditioning singers together. Then once we'd auditioned them, off they went, and me and Tom started working on the song. So we knew we had 2.5 minutes of song, the version that he'd written of his song Hold Me, that he was thinking of playing, to fill a 6.5 minute part of the show, which would be the final third of the main show itself, plus a 2-minute finale, 2.5 minutes. So he was like, okay. So we started just stretching and stretching and stretching. And we got it to a point of like 4 minutes on day one. The next day, the singers came in and we started working on the arrangements, the vocal arrangements for how they were doing it. And Tom was leading it. He was very clear about what he wanted in the most impressive way for someone so early in his career at that point. He completely knew what he was trying to deliver. And I felt my role in that moment was to facilitate that and support that and feed him with further ideas whenever he got stuck, just to unstick him. So we were just sitting there in the room together with these singers, trying stuff, and then layering backing vocals and trying to kind of have reasons for repetition, which weren't too repetitive. But in a fashion show, it doesn't always matter. You can repeat that bit more than in a traditional song. So we ended up really stretching it out 6.5 minutes. I was talking to the production director of the show, understanding the show timings, working out with him and his team how many seconds between each model. So then we knew, okay, the show will be this long based on the length of the runway. And they were feeding me all the mathematics of it. So we could then build in the dynamics of the performance to kind of fit that. And then we did it and we performed. I was responsible for the doors closing. I had eye contact with Tom's team on the stage in case I needed to communicate with him on anything. And we'd planned all that before. It happened, but then the event production guy, Ben Webster, stood in front of me with his headset on saying, tell me when to close the doors. When can we close the doors? When can we close the doors yet? Can we close the doors yet? Can we close the doors yet? And I'm there thinking, are the models still on the runway? Are there no pressure? And
wow.
Can we close the doors yet? And they're going like, I said, and I kept saying, no. And suddenly he said, now, and they shut the doors and it was perfect timing. I'd actually said no, but he heard now, luckily, and it closed. It couldn't have been better. I was going to wait 2 more seconds, but he timed it by accident perfectly by mishearing me. And then, so that went really well. And we recorded at the rehearsals, we've recorded it. So I then got someone to mix it overnight. And then Sony put it into the Apple Music system overnight. Or that next morning. I then dealt with the Apple Music guys because we had a good rapport with them. And they pulled it into the system to go live. Like on that show, I think it was like 2 days later. So the show soundtrack was then available to stream mainly on Apple. We were telling the Apple story, but it was on Spotify and everything else as well, which just added a new layer to what was possible in the work that we were doing. We didn't need to own the music, but we could facilitate a broader listening experience for our audience and give Tom a greater audience and then support his career too. And him and his team would make the money out of it. And, that was totally cool. From there, we ended up booking him to do a thing his manager came to us next and said, we're launching the album now in America. We'd love to do like a Joe Cocker style big band performance at New York Fashion Week. I know we're totally speculating here, but, with the relationship in mind, would you do that with us? And I was like, that would be amazing. Christopher was like, that would be amazing. The US team were like, we love it. We never get a chance to do anything in New York Fashion Week. This is perfect. So they took over this amazing venue, the McKittrick Hotel, which had like a little dive bar kind of a speakeasy kind of thing within it, which had been designed for an immersive theatre production that was about to happen there. And they invited the great and the good of the New York fashion crowd. And we did it. And we were there. We literally flew in on the morning of the show, brought in some amazing musicians. Members of the Mystery Jets were in his band and these amazing trumpet players. And they only got a couple of hours to rehearse together. And it was so good. Tom was so tired. He was like right in the heart of promo and festival season and everything else as well. But he did it and he found the energy to do it. And it couldn't have gone better. And then we flew at 3:00 the next morning back to the UK because Tom had to go and meet Elton John later that day for a radio session. And it was kind of like, so our timing was really tight, but we made it happen. And again, it was like us, Christopher, taking on board that we can support musicians in the way that he'd always wanted to by spending a bit of money. But it was also great for us because the US team built media coverage that was worth so much more than we'd spent and had this great brand moment that added to that music story that we were telling at the time. And then we did a bunch of other stuff. He played an event for us in the Griffith Observatory in LA, where we also had George Ezra, Benjamin Clementine, and the Grenadier Guards who stand outside Buckingham Palace performing within the show. So we did loads of fun stuff. So Tom Odell is probably the one I'm proudest of because it kind of unlocked the live music thing within our fashion shows. It really like helps us make sense of how we can work with musicians over the long term, not doing the traditional brand ambassador thing that every fashion brand, including Burberry, are doing now, where they sign expensive 2-year deals or whatever, but actually doing meaningful collaborations where we're paying artists fairly. We're also paying for stuff that they want to do, creating meaningful collaborations that we all benefit from. And then they talk about it and they talk to other musicians about it. And those musicians then call us, or we get the email from the musician who's done the thing with us saying, you've got to check out this artist. I think he'd be great for your next Taiwan event or your next whatever. And that showed us that it was working because it wasn't just the industry telling us it was working, but it was the musicians themselves who were doing it, who wanted to come back and work with us again because we respected them.
Yeah. It's a great opportunity for them, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a great partnership.
Yeah. And I was there I was fighting their corner. So I was the middleman who was on their side while also being on the brand side. And I was making sure it worked. And, when a musician had to sit at the end of a fashion runway as Cara Delevingne's walking down towards them, probably looking them directly in the eye because she likes to have fun with people. And then Samuel L. Jackson might be sitting on the front row and Anna Wintour and the whole Beckham family and whoever else, and the world's media and 100 cameramen at the end of the runway. And it's being streamed live to however many thousand people. And it's going to exist on the internet for however long after that. And it's kind of like the pressure is on. So I would also be there humanizing the experience for them. So like an artist like Benjamin Clementine came in and he was very skeptical. So my role there was to make him feel comfortable with it. So we made everything perfect for him. We prepared the place so nothing would challenge him when he walked in, aside from the unusual setup of the room and the fact that there were models and stuff. He had the perfect seat. He had the sound perfectly set up prior to him getting there. Everything was prepared. Christopher spent time with him to make sure that he could see what a nice guy Christopher was and not some fashionista, but a genuinely passionate fan. And, he was appreciative of Benjamin's work and even reshaped the timings of the show to suit Benjamin's music instead of the other way around in that moment. And then for the rest of the time, I was cracking jokes with Benjamin kind of backstage to kind of calm him because I could see he had this great sense of humor and he just needed to relax. So on that day, it was all about getting him calm and in the zone. So when he sat down at the piano and started singing, he would perform comfortably. And, that's what they were doing, all the musicians. So it was a really broad requirement from me in that business because I had to work with these artists in a meaningful way and I wanted to. But sometimes it was about choosing music. Sometimes it was about shaping the creation of music. Sometimes it was about having them perform in a certain way, often an unusual kind of like arrangement of their music or creative setup in terms of the band around them. And with, celebrities staring at them or whatever. So it was quite
pressure, isn't it?
Yeah, but it was kind of for me.
Fun.
I didn't feel it because it was fun. At times, I felt the stress of the short turnaround. We often didn't have much time at all to make things happen, but we always did it. We always landed on our feet. We were very lucky.
But for the artists, if they haven't kind of been in that particular type of environment before, for the first time, it must be a little bit nerve-wracking for them.
Totally.
Like you said.
Yeah, we really appreciated that.
So many intricacies needed. Like, as you say, the timing and the track has to be spot on, right? There's so much that really goes into, putting on the show. What are the main, aside from that, factors you have to consider when, choosing music, choosing the right artist, and everything that goes into it? Like, what are the main 5 points you have to focus on for that?
Well, the key is, number one is, with every project, just listen to the creative director. Understand where they're coming from. Do they have something clear in mind? Is there clarity? Like one time Christopher said to me, we've got this really romantic, beautiful collection. So this time I want really gruff male voices to kind of conflict with it. But okay,
that's cool.
That's a very clear direction for me. Other times it would be like orchestral and epic. Okay, so I've been talking to Ilan Eshkeri and trying to do a project with him for a while. He does epic like no one else. He really wants to work with us. He's worked with, kind of musicians as much as he's worked with classical. He's worked with scoring films and television and and actually done a whole bunch of unusual projects. So for him, this is a really interesting challenge. And we knew that there were certain themes that we could build from. And I was planning it in my head after a chat with Christopher. And then I was in the VIP bar at Glastonbury and I bumped into Ilan. And I was like, Ilan, got this idea. What do you think? He was like, amazing. So I was back to Christopher. I've got Ilan. Are you cool with that? He's like, totally, run with it. And then you run with it and I share music. And then if he likes it, we go ahead. If he doesn't, we change direction and stuff. Then other times it could be kind of nothing's quite clicking. So that's another challenge where he'll be kind of going, there might be one song he's found, but then the other stuff around it isn't quite sitting right for him. And he listens intently to everything and he'll be throwing ideas as well, but knowing it's wrong. So in those times, it's the challenge of just really digging deep and spending so much time kind of skim listening to music because I didn't have time to listen to full tracks and only focusing in on the ones that maybe had that little special something. And we could go right up to the day before a show before we made a clear decision. Richard and the Resilient team would be kind of preparing kind of licenses just in case on the stuff that were the maybes. But we would still be kind of like gung-ho, kind of going, no, there's something else. Even when James Bay performed with us at a show, we only confirmed the songs he was doing on the morning of the show. And that was tough for James, but he's such a pro. Even then, when he hadn't been played on Radio 1 yet or anything, he was, really early into it. And like he was unflappable because he'd still been rehearsing with us and we've been talking to him. And he's a very confident guy who he got himself into the mindset for it. So it meant that when we decided, on the Friday before that Monday, I was on the phone to Dolly Parton's manager trying to get a more affordable deal for him to do a version of Jolene in the show. But Dolly's manager just wouldn't lower the fee. We wanted to, there's a brilliant version of Jolene on YouTube that someone has slowed down to like from a 45 RPM to a 33 and a third. And it sounds like Ray LaMontagne. And we were like, imagine that. But we couldn't get it. So we were having those battles a little bit as well, which happens. And you deal with it when it happens.
All supervisors get that, yeah.
Yeah. And then we ended up using 3 of James's songs. And that was great. But then later that day, we had a problem with his electric guitar and some kind of feedback coming from the infrastructure of this tent that we built in Hyde Park. So we had to shift suddenly to acoustic guitar. Christopher was fine with it. James was cool with it. Luckily, it kind of worked and actually made it better, I think, because I feel James performs in a more passionate way when he's with his acoustic guitar than he does he's more subtle when he uses the electric. So it worked even better for the fashion show. But other things that kind of are integral are surprising the creative director. Don't just follow the brief. Give them what they're asking for. But if there's something that just feels instinctively right to you and you just think, this might be better, you share it. And you have to really believe in it at the point you share it, because you're distracting them from what they need to be doing. And they're really busy in that period. And Benjamin Clementine was one of the examples of that. 2 weeks ahead of a show, I'd been listening to Benjamin's music for about 6 months, trying to work out if he was actually British. And it was really hard to work it out, because his story was all about Paris and France and busking. And I was kind of like, okay, I'm 90% sure I'm just going to do it. And Christopher called me and the event production director up to his office within 5 minutes and was like, do you think he'd play live? And Ben, the production director, was like, Christopher, we don't have a stage or a piano or anything, or even space for a stage. He was like, you could fix that though, couldn't you? And Ben was like, probably, but I need to know pretty quickly. Dave, do you think you can get Benjamin? I was like, don't know. I'll try. But I've only just worked out he might be British. Can I work this out? It's like, yeah, but, probably. So I worked it out. Within a day, I'd managed to get hold of someone, spoke with someone who was like, yeah, we'll make it happen. Then I got a call from someone else saying, don't speak to that person. They don't own the rights for it. It's not their call.
Oh,
you need to speak to me. I'm Benjamin's manager. I was like, okay.
Right.
And then we had a really good chat from there. And he was like, okay, we've got to make this happen. He called me back a day later saying, Benjamin said no. I was like, okay.
No.
I was like, okay, is it a no, or is it, what can we be doing to make it more appealing?
Yes.
And the manager was like, good. He was like, I like your thinking. I was like, good. So what is it? He went, let's just keep trying. Let's keep working it out. He was like, fuel me with information about what it is that makes you guys so artistically friendly and everything. I was like, fine.
Why was he just flat out no to begin
because
with?
He was like, what I'm told is he was like, why would a fashion company want my music? Why would I want my music in a fashion show? Who are these people? What is this fashionista thing?
Yeah,
is this credible? Is this, he was just unsure. And I was given a deadline of the Thursday before the show, roughly. And I got the call at 9 a.m. from the production director saying, is this happening? And I said, yes, it is. He's on board. We've got him. And he was like, brilliant. We're hitting go. I was like, great. Hung up the phone, called the manager. Any improvement on the no? And I've been sharing other stuff with Christopher along the way.
Love that.
What about this guy singing and playing piano? What about this one? What if we did this? And he was like, no, Benjamin. He was obsessing about him. And I was like,
I bet that was
going to make
few
it happen.
Sleepless nights.
No, you know what? It wasn't, because I was kind of like, we're going to find a way. And I was kind of going, can I meet Benjamin? Can you put me in front of Benjamin? Please, can I talk to him directly?
Yeah.
I'd love to meet him and show him the human side of what we do. And like a couple of days later, I got a call saying, he's in. I was like, good. And
wow.
I'd already seen pictures of the piano and stuff that they were doing, and a video of them cutting the wall out of thinking,
oh my God, that would have given me
we might not have the musician. But
that would have given
fine.
me a huge anxiety. Oh my God.
But I don't know. I kind of go with the flow in a lot of ways, and I kind of,
which is great because you're in the right role for it.
Yeah, and I kind of was like, I just know sometimes things just happen at the end. And we got it. It was fine. And Benjamin turned up and was like suspicious, but I humanized it like I said earlier. And it was the most amazing performance. And, everyone in that room was just like, wow, this guy is amazing. And he ended up, there was Steve McQueen, the director there. And he was he was already planning with Christopher to work and direct a fragrance commercial. And he was like, I need Benjamin's music on that commercial. So already, just by being in that show environment, it led to the next opportunity and the next after that.
Amazing.
Yeah. So I think his flexibility is quite key. Unflappability, listening, but translating in the way that you both feel that the creative director wants, but also those surprises that might excite them to be the replacement for what they were originally thinking as well, so that's broadly what makes it work. Yeah.
And I had a guest on here previously who did the Victoria's Secret, handled all the licensing music for that side of things. And sometimes the models would also have a say in the music choices being used. Especially Adriana Lima would sometimes be heavily involved in some of the music choices as well. Did you ever find that
I've never seen it. I've never seen it happen, but I could well imagine it, because creative directors have such a challenge, and sometimes it's the teams around them who force more ownership of a collaboration, and some creative directors will give a little bit more in order to make a partnership work. At Burberry, we were very curating outwards, so that was never something we faced. I could imagine, though, a creative director being surrounded, really buying into kind of a model or other people kind of in almost as a muse, and then taking on board. They spend a lot of time together then, and taking on board, the influence and inspiration from those people, in the same way that the creative directors often will from their stylists, their creative consultants, who are essentially stylists who help them make sense of the collections and perfect how it looks on the runway, who are feeding in lots of opinion. Like Christopher had Elliot Smedley, who is amazing. Another really nice guy, came from magazines, and they worked from day one together at Burberry. And he knew when to step back and let Christopher lead, and he knew when to kind of like help fuel his kind of interests. And he would always say to me, "When are we going to get George Michael? Can we get Wham back together?" And he never did, unfortunately. He was always tongue in cheek about it.
No, I don't think you definitely won't have the chance now.
Yeah.
Bless him. So compared to, say, ads, it's very different in terms of, say, what's needed in terms of, say, a live show. Talk us through some of the process of some of the ads, the ad side of things.
Yeah, so
the licensing on that side and the creative process.
Yeah, so my approach is the same as it was on my first day at Burberry when I did my first search for music, and I mainly do it myself. So it's personal research. I dig deep. I spend time. I go down rabbit holes.
You have no help. You do it all your own.
I do it on my own, but while at Burberry, as things grew, I brought someone into the team who helped me do the searching, and then another person, and that was brilliant. Like I would
kind of like I was being fueled then in the same way that Christopher had been by me prior, but also doing my own research alongside it. But I very rarely brief rights holders, because I'll always take on board what they want to send me and their version of what they're seeing happen within the brand. And sometimes that's where I'll find the music when I'm doing my own digging around. So it's really useful and it's really helpful to get stuff through. It's only when I get stuck or I have really limited time to turn something around that I will brief out. So in the last year, I briefed once, the year before that once. And at Burberry, I actually once in 7 years I briefed out. But the thing is, we were doing so much that I was talking to most rights owners about things, many completely independent. And when we found a track, we would go to the people, and people would often be surprised that we wanted to use their music of sometimes unknown artists. And we'd be like, we love it. We've found it. It feels right for us. And we want to pay for it. And we want to do it right. And, Richard and the Resilient team would do, really be really fair with the contracts. And I would be involved in budgeting, and Cleo from my team would be kind of leading that more proactively and making sure everything was in budget, but also that people were paid fairly. And she would then kind of like manage me to help focus me in terms of deadlines and all this stuff around it. And I would be feeding stuff to Christopher at the points when it felt right to share it with him. Sometimes it was him knowing that he was going to be away for 10 days or something and knowing I needed to get something within time. Sometimes it would be kind of like broader than just finding a song, where it would be like, okay, I'm looking for a song, but it feels like this song is right, but it's sung by an American artist. Should we re-record it or something like that? There was another time where Christopher said to me for a fragrance commercial called My Burberry, I put a spell on you. He's like, has to be I put a spell on you. I love the Joss Stone and Jeff Beck version. I was like, great. This is a straightforward
She's got a great
dog.
voice.
Let's go and make it happen. So we had no alternative tracks. He was very clear. We ended up having to pay slightly over what we were normally paying. But it is what it is when you want the specific track and
you have to,
have no flexibility. And it is what it is. It's a very valuable track. When it came to refreshing that campaign, Chris was like, what do we do? We're changing the model. We're having a new kind of style to it. I was like, let's keep the song and make that a theme. But why didn't we get someone to record it? He was like, yeah. And so he was like, have a think. And I was like, okay, here's a list of people. It was like Adele, Lianne La Havas, Duffy, 8 names on it. And he was like, do you think Duffy would do it? And I was like,
over Adele? This must have been when Adele was.
The reason is he'd used Adele's. He'd already used Adele's music in a show prior to my joining. I think 2010, he used the song, and he always felt that working with Adele on music would be amazing, but was also quite obvious. So he didn't shy away from it completely, but he was always aware of. But what else might there be? Because every brand, if they can, will work with Adele. So maybe we shouldn't be following the obvious
same
route. We worked with
Duffy's
Adele.
great.
The VIP team dressed her for one of her global tours, and there was a relationship there. And Christopher met with her and used to bump into her when she was with her child at the playground, when he was with his kids, and there was a connection already there. But Duffy hadn't done anything in several years. She'd had that iconic first album and then gone quiet after album 2, which hadn't quite connected, and Diet Coke hadn't quite connected with people and maybe hadn't utilized her voice and her kind of character as well as they could have done and as thoughtfully as they could have done. And she'd had some bad experiences and was kind of like in general and was shying away from things. So I was like, but let's try, So I reached out, managed to get hold of a lawyer, who put me in touch with her manager, who a week later wasn't her manager anymore. I was back with the lawyer, and the lawyer was trying really hard to understand the creative aspects of what we were doing. But, he was brilliant, but also finding it hard, and eventually agreed to do it. And we were like, we'd love Bernard Butler, her original producer who produced Mercy and everything, to work on it with her. What do you think? He was like, they haven't been in touch. And it's a little bit of a tough relationship. And I was like, okay, yeah, but
this is the industry all over, isn't it?
But it was like, we were like, look, how can we help? How can we help facilitate it? And we were a part of helping get them talking, and they clicked again, and it was all good. And they spent a day rehearsing. Then we went into Abbey Road, but I was in with Bernard and his musicians as they recorded this most beautiful arrangement of it, quite a traditional take on it, with his kind of really phenomenal guitar kind of stuff on there too. And then Duffy came in for the afternoon. She could only be there for an hour or so because she had a rescue dog at home in Wales, which she wanted to get back to. So she got driven there. She was there, quick chat, briefing, talk about it, get her comfortable as quickly as we could, straight on the mic, recording, nailing it every time. She was so good. It was such a pleasure to hear her. And then she got back in the car and went off. I then had to actually, ironically, leave the session while Bernard was finessing it to go and meet David Furnish to talk about an Elton John project. Then I came back and we finalized the mix. And there we were. Ready to go with a new version of I Put a Spell on You for the next campaign. And then after Christopher had left the business, when Riccardo Tisci had come in, we felt we needed a rougher version of it, and we went with the Kills version of I Put a Spell on You for the next iteration of it. So that song stayed throughout because it felt right, but the versions of it gave it the personality and the character to kind of evolve through that too. So yeah, the publishing side made a lot of money out of us.
Yeah, I bet. It's such a classic though, isn't it? I mean, it's such a classic. And I love how you just casually dropped in there. Oh, I just casually met David Furnish about an Elton John project. But anyway, back to...
It was so weird. That was such a fun day. But it was funny. So on the way in there with the senior vice president of marketing who'd met him, he was like, being quite serious. So Dave, you need to be the serious Dave today. It's going to be all this. And we went in and had a really nice meeting. It was so perfect. We were doing a vinyl box set of 6 of Elton's albums, one of which hadn't been released on vinyl since the mid-70s, and a beautifully packaged thing. So it was a brilliant project, but again, another broadly different to what anything else we had done.
Yeah. You've worked with so many other incredible artists, and I love that it was also championing British artists with British brand, and also really championing indie artists, giving them that chance to partner with such a big iconic brand like Burberry, but also not just going with the most obvious, biggest artists. It's also looking at, hey, like Duffy's great. She hasn't done anything for a little while. Why don't we bring her in? And taking that time to actually really look at things like that as to who is actually just best for the project.
Totally. But also asking. Because so many times I talk to people who are like, but they wouldn't do it. I'm like, are you sure? Have you asked? Let's ask. But I learned kind of storytelling early in my career, thanks to the PR side of what I did, I think, and the way that company capable working, and that stuck with me. So the way you engage an artist, whether it's via their manager or whoever else, it's important that the story you tell is going to compel them to want to work with you. And like, sometimes I can take a few weeks concocting that story of how I'm going to ask the question, if I have the luxury of that time, to kind of make sure I'm asking and bringing them into that world in a way that it's kind of 99% likely they're going to say yes. They're going to want to say yes. So they'll want to free up their diary to do the project together. And being at Burberry, we were doing so much fun stuff. We had so many good calling cards to show what we could do together. So when Christopher turned to me one day after we'd had a show where the singer Rhodes had performed with a 24-piece orchestra, and after that session, we were back in the office after that show, no parties, straight back to the office. He was in the marketing team thanking people, just said to me, Alison Moyet was my kind of teenage crush. Do you think she'd ever perform at the show? And I was like, let's ask. That's my next challenge. So she then did the next show, and Christopher was like a little overwhelmed. She was overwhelmed. She was amazing. Totally. And she was so nervous. And again, it was about humanizing it with her and making it easy with her. And we were surprised that she might be nervous, but I learned a lot from that she'd been through a period of anxiety and couldn't leave the house at one point. So getting up, and actually we made her stand in the middle of the runway, which is a real challenge.
Yeah.
And then had the challenge of how does she leave the runway? How does she get on? All that without making her feel uncomfortable. These things are just day to day when you're in a company like Burberry.
But most everyday, people that don't work in the industry have no idea the level of small details like that. Getting on and leaving the runway, just the small details. And
in luxury, it's the little things that make the biggest difference.
Yeah. And also just with artists, people forget that they're really sensitive souls, At the end of the day, they suffer with anxiety too. They suffer
Totally,
with all the everyday things too. People, I think, forget that about them. That's how they manage to create such amazing things.
Yeah.
Because they're sensitive, aren't they? So, I want to lead on to now. I mean, I could chat all day, and you could probably write a book on all the stories that you have about, you know, all your time at Burberry and the amazing artists you got to work with and stuff. But I want to delve a little bit more now into you actually breaking out and setting up your own thing, your own company. So at what stage did you decide? Because it's not an overnight decision, is it?
It was a 6-month process.
Okay. So what sparked that?
So it started with Christopher Bailey leaving Burberry. I probably would still be there if he was still there and he still wanted me to work with him, because it was such a rapport. We worked so well together. So it took me by surprise when he decided. In hindsight, it wasn't surprising. The signs were there. I just was blind to them. And, you know, being a PLC, he couldn't kind of declare it. You know, when he declared it, it had to be public straight away. You know?
Right.
So whatever conversations he was having with his partner and everybody, it was kind of the few could know.
Right.
And so it was announced. It was like, okay, we've got a few months to get my head around this. And myself and Greg Stogden, who was his number 2 on all creative, and also then the other creative leads, art directors and everybody else, we were talking about, what if we don't have a creative director for a bit? What do we do? But if we do, how are we going to take the challenge? And we were just kind of deconstructing it all and making sense of it all. And Riccardo Tisci was announced. And I thought, so do I stay and work with Riccardo and maybe stay for 5-10 years or whatever, who knows, and work on the evolving of what music means for the brand? And I could see that he had a different taste and stylistically it was different. And then it was kind of like, or do I take the opportunity to venture further? And my initial instinct was to stick with it. But then my first meeting with him kept being pushed back because he was so busy, because he had to learn the business. He was in the archives so much, learning about the background, the heritage, old products, which were informing his decisions on new products and to design his first collection. And meanwhile, there were loads of marketing and advertising requirements, new stores being opened that he had kind of like overall creative kind of say on, and rebranding the whole brand, and so much going on that my meeting was pushed to the side. So it took me 6 months to meet him, and it was 6 days before his first show. I already had Robert Del Nair from Massive Attack creating a soundtrack, but with no real input directly from the creative director, which is what I was used to. I was used to listening and watching that person speak, which would fuel my understanding of what they needed. It's the gestures, it's the words, it's the tone of voice. It's all of that helps kind of me understand what is needed. So I kind of was getting to that point where this is hard. And then after meeting him, again, he was so busy finessing his collection and getting everything in place that I'd be like, okay, he's going to meet his assistant would let me know that he wants to talk to you again, stay. And at midnight, I'd still be sitting on my desk thinking, kind of tomorrow now, will I see him today? And then also though, Greg, the SVP of creative, sitting next to me as well, going like, I haven't seen him either. You know, don't feel that it's you.
Don't take it personal.
Focused. And he then one night just said to me, Dave, there's a chance for me to help you leave in a really positive way. It's not, the business isn't asking you to leave, but if you wanted to, now would be the time to tell me, because I can probably initiate a friendly exit. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. So in that time, while everything was going on and things were being delayed and I was getting no real feedback, I was sharing music without context. He wasn't getting my context and I wasn't getting his. It was a bit jarring and it was hard to work. And the business was used to me having all music conversations directly with Christopher. So then the art direction team were feeding stuff back to me without the experience of having done that necessarily. and weren't taking on board the essence of what I needed to understand, even when I was trying to ask for it. And through no fault of their own, they were all brilliant people, brilliant creatives. And it just wasn't quite connecting. So I'd been thinking about what else can I do? Well, I can do this for lots of other brands was my thinking. Reality of then leaving. And, I met with so many people, but the opportunities I expected weren't necessarily there because the relationships were already there between other music directors and the fashion designers. So I was kind of like, okay, I need to take a different approach to this. And then suddenly I discovered I was going to be a dad of triplet boys. And I was like, I need to just get a job, any job. I need money. And I took a job working for Ben Lovett of Mumford & Sons. He was my line manager, the keyboard player for Mumford & Sons.
Nice.
Running a music venue business and hospitality business where they have O'Meara in London and Flatiron Square. And they were about to launch Lafayette and Goods Way in North London. And I basically, I took over the running of the UK business along with a finance director and an operations director. And it wasn't what I expected. And suddenly I was doing this. We launched Lafayette a week or so before COVID hit. We knew COVID was coming. We didn't know when. It was like really interesting being in a business, learning all this stuff, but also realizing during that process, I don't really want to do this job. I'm doing this for money. That's not what I should be doing. And then COVID kind of closed down that industry. My job was cut straight away before the whole kind of like process of supporting staff kind of came in from the government, but it was the right decision. And they needed someone who's more dedicated to it, who would believe in it more passionately. And it was clarity for me that I want to do the music supervision stuff and the world around that. So I went back to the drawing board of, okay, I'm a consultant now. Anyone need music? Oh, fashion shows aren't happening. Okay. Those projects are being shut down. And then it kind of like, okay, let's see what happens. And then a guy that had been the singer of a band called Vinyl Jackets, who had done a Burberry acoustic session, they'd sent in speculatively a few links to their music. And they were like, what do you think? And we were like, let's do a session. You're really good. They were like a cross between everything and the Future Heads and some other things. It was really interesting. And in the years since, he'd got himself a job as a brand marketing intern, I think, at L'Oreal, and then become a permanent member of staff. And now he was at Harry's, the shaving brand. And he said, I've just done the mini MBA with Mark Ritson, and I've focused on sonic branding and sonic identity because that's passion point. And now I've just persuaded my marketing director at Harry to let me do a sonic branding project. I've met with all the obvious candidates and none of them are inspiring me. So I thought I'd give you a call because I liked how you did it at Burberry and you seem like a friendly enough guy. Would you want to talk about it? I was like, client number one, yes, let's get started. And we worked on it and found, I had like the Libertines drummer doing a Motown demo for them. Cool. I had the former VP of brand design of Burberry doing a house track. I had these guys from the Daydream Club who had done Burberry acoustic sessions and an eyewear campaign and stuff doing a thing. I had this singer who was involved in all the choir elements of the fashion shows and stuff that we had at Burberry. And a bunch of other people kind of creating very different broad kind of array of soundtrack demos to get us going, all paid. And then we whittle it down to, they were wanting to be a very human brand. And we started thinking about the human voice and therefore the choir option felt interesting. So we ended up then tweaking that into more of a Bobby McFerrin style, banging kind of thing, clicking fingers, beatboxing, as well as human voices. And actually, Ela from London to Contemporary Voices was launching the UK's first trans choir. And Ela they were saying, do we would Harry's ever consider working with the trans choir instead of London Contemporary Voices? It'd be a great moment for their choir to kind of be presented, because a macho shaving brand which is how people might look at it, actually doing something quite really human. And I went to Ben Dancer, the marketing guy, and he was like, wow, you couldn't have presented something better for us. This is so un-Gillette. It's perfect. And we just then worked on it and tweaked it, recorded it, and they used it in the end on an ad campaign. The idea was that it would become more than that, but in the end, it was an extended version soundtracking the advertising campaign, which then got relicensed into Germany and a couple of other markets, and then relicensed year on year. And Ela was fairly paid for it, which was important to both Ben and me, because, Harry's didn't want to be seen as a brand who would do anything negative towards creative people. And neither did Ben as a former musician himself. So that was kind of step one. And then suddenly an ex-Burberry colleague joined Bang & Olufsen, and was like, with Bang & Olufsen at that point, in 96 years of existence, have never used music as a selling point. It's always about sound and visual design. He was like, I want to change that. And I was like, great. So I consulted them for 18 months on where music could fit in, and we did all sorts of playlist curation. I wasn't involved in the advertising at all because they had a system in place that they were happy with, but it was more broadly consulting the marketing team. Then at the same time, another former Burberry colleague was at Harley Davidson, and I just checked in with him, and he was like, your timing's quite good. I want you to meet our head of marketing, who's about to relaunch our Livewire electric vehicle product as a standalone business. And it has to feel different. So we had a chat. Within that 1 hour chat, I had 2 briefs. One was to help them refine and define what sound of brand would be. They already had some clarity of that, but I was able to kind of broaden it and turn it into something meaningful through store playlists initially. And then I partnered them with Apple Music because of the relationship I had via the global head of Apple Music, Oliver Schuster, who helped us position Livewire as an official curator on the platform. And then we utilized that platform to showcase playlists and help start to tell the musical story of the Livewire brand and show it as being meaningfully different to the kind of Steppenwolf and Led Zeppelin kind of feeling of Harley itself, appeal to women as much as it does to men and a younger audience. And it was an oddly British dynamic to the soundtrack in the end. And then a few more things came up. An ex-Burberry colleague joined Tiffany and was like, there's a new chief creative brand officer, Hector, who's just joined. We've been talking about music. He'd love to talk to you. We had a chat. He gave me a project, soundtracked an eyewear campaign, working with an independent artist called the Fofo. And it was great working with the Fofo because, again, supporting independent music with such a big kind of global brand is, we know it makes a difference, but it really was the best track from all the options that we had. That one I did brief out as well, but I did go with the song that I found myself on that one. And then Breitling more recently, kind of working with them, there's a former Burberry guy who's gone in as their new CMO. There's a theme here. Who knew what I was about. And he was like, we've got an ad. It's got Austin Butler. There's a soundtrack, which isn't quite connecting. It's not cool enough. Can you do something with that? And I was kind of like, yeah. So I played around with a few different directions for them, but also an evolving of the rock sound that they've been using at that time. I kind of was like, your budget doesn't stretch to Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, but that's one direction that I really recommend we look at. And then they were like, should we try Black Rebel Motorcycle Club? And I was like, okay. So we ended up getting Black Rebel Motorcycle Club. I went by the manager and we worked it out. And there was a deal to be done because he'd their deals had just finished with Universal and Warner, I think it was. So he owns the masters and or the band, and he owned the masters, and he'd just done a publishing deal with VMG. It was like, okay, well, I can do the master deal with you, and I can do the publishing deal with VMG. Great. And then, so we made it happen. But the thing that made it work within budget is they've re-recorded many of their songs. So we used a re-recording, which made it perfectly within budget, which was a good budget, but it was lower than it would have cost had Universal been licensing at the time. And because the band are now making the bulk of that money instead of paying off a debt to a record label or whatever, it meant that the budget worked for them. So timing was fortuitous. And that re-recording is so close to the original. It was bang on. And the publishers didn't mind. They were led by the master conversation. And being a new client for them, it kind of was a bit easier to just kind of help shape it to make sure it worked within budget because the manager was already on board.
Nice. And so there's so much here. What do you feel like has been, you've had so many different experiences, and it's really worked out well for you as well throughout, it seems, your whole career, and you're now able to work on all these campaigns for yourself, for your own company. But setting up and going it alone, what do you feel like is the biggest lesson that you learn at that?
Don't assume any of the projects are actually going to happen until someone's told you to invoice them and signing contracts. There's so much of my time is wasted with brands who have an intention but don't have a budget. And the amount of times you run around, you're trying to get them to be clear on budgets and everything else, and then suddenly they ghost you or it disappears. And it happens a lot. I'm ghosted every day.
Oh,
it's
everywhere,
we all are. And I think sometimes it's shame. Sometimes everyone's busier than they've ever been. A lot of people are having the teams are being cut into smaller departments. I know it's tough for everyone, so I don't take it personally, but it's just again and again it happens. That's kind of the biggest challenge. The others are kind of filling the gaps, because when it's busy, it's chaotic, but when it's quiet, it's scary, working independently and not having people to bounce off so easily. So I've tried to find people who I can strategically align with, and I'm trying to actually broaden even further, ironically, my offering. So it's kind of like I'm doing the music supervision thing and the music direction for fashion and strategy for some brands and everything. You picking up bits of things that I've done historically, that I feel comfortable doing. But I'm also then working on a startup, which is in partnership with some AI expertise and a guy that used to be at Spotify and stuff. I'm doing another thing with a guy that's just left a major FMCG brand who spotted a gap. And now between us and a third person, we're trying to see how we can fill that. So I'm starting to diversify more because I kind of have to. I'm also starting to think about catalog and representing catalog in a way, because I have such a broad network of people now, many of whom can't pay me a fee, but they can pay for music. And if I am taking my cut from the music share, making sure the musicians are paid fairly and everything else as well, and just negotiating carefully to ensure that my fee is included within there, it just means that I have a longer term career open to me. Because the older I get, doesn't matter what my experience is, are they going to work with me over that 30-year-old who has 10 years experience, but in a more current version of me? It's questionable. So I have to be prepared for the next iterations of it. But meanwhile, all my ex-Burberry colleagues keep getting new jobs, and some of them call me, and I'm happy with that. Because that keeps the lights on,
Yeah. Do you think you would go back into, say, the corporate side of things again?
Yeah, I would, for the right opportunity. It has to be the right thing, now that I've been talking to brands in a much broader and businesses in a much broader sense, my days are so varied. I'm talking to football clubs. I'm talking to all sorts of people about how music engages with them. I love working with Christopher Bailey type characters, people who are kind of like putting their heart and soul into building these kind of insane empires built around their own passions. If I could work with David Beckham tomorrow, I would. He's got such a broad range of businesses that would be amazing to get under the skin of and work
Victoria
with someone
Beckham.
like him. Yeah,
they both have.
Of course. And so it's kind of, so I could see it happening, but it would have to be something spectacular. And I've got triplets to feed, so it has to be paid well.
Yes. And what do you think is the biggest lesson you've learned overall from all of your experience? Like, going back to your younger self, what advice would you give, not just to your younger self, but to those as well in the industry?
I think
coming up.
My main thing is everything is possible. It really is. Even when there's a no, everything is possible. You've got to be tenacious. You've got to have this really kind of probably something slightly incorrect going on up there for me anyway, where you kind of manage to get past the worry of problems. There's been one other example where I needed a conductor for a fashion show and asked the conductor I wanted months in advance. And he was like, I'm not available. And then I turned to the production director and said to him the day before the first rehearsal, I was like, how surprised would you be if I was to tell you that I haven't booked a conductor yet? He was like, I'm not surprised at all, but I'm fully expecting someone to turn up tomorrow. And I was like, I called up the guy straight after that who I'd first asked and said, are you still unavailable this weekend? He was like, no, I'm totally available. I was like, do you want to do it? Yeah, great, come. And it's just like, I was lucky. Yeah. I did have a few thoughts of other people, but I think I would really say to people, open-minded, be flexible, be tenacious. Don't assume it's impossible. Just go for it. And then ask the question of people, because a lot of the time people want to do interesting work. And no matter what the ask is, if you don't ask, you're never going to get an answer, good or bad.
Yeah, it is true. I think you've almost got to have a slight stubbornness about you to not want to take no for an answer, and also be great at problem solving to look at different options, and stay, I always think, emotionally detached from a lot of things, because it's tough. It is tough, but exciting at the same time.
Yeah,
for sure. Otherwise we would still be here doing it, would
Indeed.
we? So, thank you so much, Dave. Oh my God, literally, it's been so super interesting. You have so many stories, and I'm sure there's still so many that we haven't even heard.
I've probably forgotten most of them.
You reckon you probably need your own podcast series? So for those, I'm sure there's so much in here to unpack for them. Our listeners will be able to take so much advice from it and inspiration. So thank you so much for being a guest.
My absolute pleasure.
I look forward to seeing you on the live pitch session shortly.
Looking forward to it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ultimate Sync Sessions with Amelia McCloskey. To learn how Ultimate Sync Access can connect you with new opportunities, visit ultimatesyncaccess.com. Subscribe for our monthly episodes and follow us on socials for more sync insights. See you next time.